He had only stepped out for a minute, just to get bread, maybe milk. I don't even remember now. It was raining. Not heavy, not light, just that sort of rain that soaks into your bones before you even realize you're cold. I was sitting by the window, legs wrapped in an old shawl, the one my mother had knitted during the war. The clock ticked louder than usual, or maybe the silence inside had become too dense. And then she came, an old woman, bent but not broken. Her eyes had no light, but her hands were full of money, neatly folded bills. She didn't knock like strangers do. She knocked like someone who belonged. And when I opened the door, because I always open doors for the elderly, she looked straight into my face and said, "He promised me this house. I've come to pay." I stood there, barefoot on the cold floor, heart suddenly unsure whether to beat faster or stop altogether. "I beg your pardon," I said. She opened her wallet, slid out a photo. It was my husband, young, smiling, arms around her waist, like he used to do to me in the beginning, before the world turned impractical and me invisible. "I've waited 15 years, she whispered. Not kindly, not cruelly, just factually. He said when you'd pass, I'd take your place." She looked past me, into the home I had scrubbed with my own hands, where I had bled, cooked, prayed, wept, and raised 2 children who now barely remembered what my voice sounded like on the phone. "He told me you were sick," she said, eyes scanning my trembling hand on the doorknob. "Said it wouldn't be long now, that I should prepare." It wasn't the betrayal that made my knees buckle, not the lie, not even the money. It was that he had a plan, a future, a timeline. He didn't just cheat. He arranged my exit like a bureaucrat handling expired paperwork. I didn't scream, didn't shout, didn't slap her or curse him or fall to the floor like a scene from a melodrama. No, I simply turned around, walked into the kitchen, made myself tea, the bitter kind, and sat. She left the money on the side table like it was rent. And when he returned whistling, plastic bag in hand, I didn't say a word. I only looked at him. That's when he knew. Not because I accused, not because I cried, because I didn't. Because silence, my darling, is the oldest language of the betrayed, and I was fluent. I waited until the children had gone to sleep, until he'd locked the doors and brushed his teeth and slipped under the blanket beside me like nothing had happened. Then I rose, packed only what I could carry. The rest they'd already taken from me long ago. And as I closed the door behind me, he didn't even stir, because men like him never believe the leaving will come silently. But it did. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply walked away. The house didn't creak out of age. It groaned out of memory. Every wooden panel had heard my children laugh. Every tile had felt the weight of my barefoot steps from midnight feedings to early morning prayers. That house was not just built with bricks. It was stitched together with my silence, my compromises, my dreams that I folded into theirs. We bought the land when we had nothing but hope and a borrowed pickup truck. My husband had calloused hands and a temper back then. I had young lungs and too much faith. We built slowly, room by room. I remember mixing cement with a baby strapped to my back, sweat dripping into the foundation. The kitchen took shape first, because I said, if we're going to fight, let it be over hot food. And fight we did, about paint, about bills, about futures neither of us could name. But the walls never heard us scream. They only absorbed the softness, the lullabies, the whispered apologies, the stories told under candlelight when the electricity ran out. I still remember the day we laid the first rug in the hallway. Our daughter spilled juice on it the same evening. I didn't scold her. I laughed. That was the moment I realized I wasn't building a house. I was building a history. The bedrooms were painted in colors. They picked themselves blue for the eldest, because he said it made him dream better. Pink for the younger one, even though she later insisted she hated pink. I let them choose anyway. Freedom begins with the small things. The backyard had my hands in it. Every tree planted during exam season. Every rosebush blooming after a hospital visit. Even the cracked birdbath in the corner. That was from the time I tried to surprise him for our anniversary, and he forgot it altogether. I didn't mind. I told myself, they're busy. They're growing. One day, they'll return to this soil. But time didn't return anything. It took. Birthdays turned into calendar reminders I saw but didn't open. Anniversaries passed in silence. The laughter faded first, then the footsteps. Then even the sound of their names being spoken inside these rooms disappeared. Still, I kept the place warm. I changed the curtains each season. I aired the rooms. I waited, because I believed houses remember who they were built for, and I still believed they'd come home. But when they did, it wasn't for me. It was for signatures, for paperwork, for documents that proved ownership. not belonging. Their hands touched doorknobs like strangers. Their eyes scanned rooms like appraisers. No one asked about the photos still on the wall, about the mark behind the sofa where she used to measure her height with a pencil. No one looked in the kitchen drawers to find the old recipe cards. They just spoke of renovations, of selling, of upgrading the old place. They called it old. They called it replaceable. They called me unnecessary. They forgot this home wasn't made of walls. It was made of me. And as I walked room to room that night, I don't remember what made me start looking. Maybe it was the way they stopped looking at me. My son's visits became shorter, his words more carefully chosen, as if measuring each sentence for legal consequences, not love. My daughter became distant, eyes fluttering away whenever I mentioned the house, and my husband. He had started locking drawers. A man who once forgot to zip his wallet now kept passwords like secrets carved in stone. One morning, after they'd all gone, some to work, some pretending they had, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the old biscuit tin we used to store photographs. I hadn't opened it in years. When I finally did, the smell of paper, rust, and old promises filled the air. Beneath the photos were envelopes I didn't recognize, bank letters, account statements, loan approvals I never signed, a second mortgage I never consented to. I blinked hard, thought maybe I was misreading, but then I saw my name forged, awkwardly looped, in ink that looked too new for such old decisions. I didn't react, not immediately. I put everything back in the tin, made myself tea sugarless. I sat in the same chair where I used to spoon-feed my daughter porridge during flu season, that same table where my son once did his math homework, cheeks puffed out in frustration. And then I rose. I began pulling threads, quietly, like a woman knitting her own shroud. I visited the local registry office, smiled at the clerk like any aging wife trying to understand some old property paperwork. She handed me nearly made my hands go numb. There it was, the transfer application of our house to my son, filed 3 months ago, signed again in my name, as if I had willingly handed over the very foundation of my lungs, my labor, my life. But that wasn't all. The woman, the one with the money, had been depositing monthly into a house fund for renovations, she claimed, but there were receipts showing jewelry sales, pieces that had once belonged to my mother, to me, gone. My husband had sold them quietly, said they were in the locker for safety. He had been gutting my legacy piece by piece, replacing it with silence and smiles. When I confronted the bank manager, an old man with soft eyes, he lowered his voice and said, "Ma'am, we were told you were in decline, that you wanted to pass things over peacefully before." Well, before it got worse. They had planned my fading, rehearsed it, financially prepared for it. They had drafted the script of my disappearance and passed it around behind my back. It wasn't neglect, it was design. I walked home differently that day. Not slower, straighter. I didn't feel old. I felt ancient, like stone sharpened by centuries of betrayal. I boiled rice that evening. The grains stuck to the pot. No one noticed. They were too busy with their screens. But I was watching them now, like a mother watching snakes she once mistook for vines. There's something terrifying about a woman who's done crying. I stopped making tea for everyone, stopped answering texts, stopped asking if they'd be home for dinner. The silence made them uncomfortable, but I was finally comfortable inside it. I had always made space for them. Now I made space for myself. The shift wasn't loud, it was surgical. I took the old address book from the shelf, the one they used to laugh at, saying I should just save everything in the cloud. Page after yellowed page held numbers from another life. I stopped at one name, Farah Siddiq, once my dearest friend. We raised our babies side by side. Then life scattered us, like dry leaves in different winds. She had become a lawyer, a fierce one. We hadn't spoken in years, but pain makes you remember who stayed, and power reminds you who could return. I called her. She answered with, "I was just thinking of you." I told her everything, not with tears, but with the calm clarity of someone who has been set on fire and now walks through ash without flinching. Farah listened, took notes, asked sharp questions, and then she said, "You're not going to scream, are you?" "No," I replied. "I'm going to file." She laughed. "That's even better." The days that followed were meticulous. I gathered evidence, printed statements, photocopied the forged documents. She helped me prepare a legal strategy that didn't seek vengeance. It sought restoration. And yet, in every page I signed, every clause I approved, I felt something inside me straighten, my spine, my breath, my resolve. I began locking drawers of my own. I began whispering to the house at night, not in despair, but in warning. I'm taking you back. You will no longer be theirs. I moved with precision, just like I used to manage a house of 4 children, 3 part-time jobs, and a husband who only remembered anniversaries when reminded twice. They didn't notice, of course. My son was too busy scrolling through property listings, dreaming of resale. My daughter had already asked a decorator friend to look at the layout. My husband, he was still whistling, still leaving for errands that took too long, maybe still seeing the woman who came with money. None of them noticed that the woman they thought was shrinking was now expanding into every corner they thought they owned. I visited the registrar again, this time with Farah. This time with documents they couldn't manipulate, this time with the voice of someone who had raised 2 children and was now burying her tolerance. I rewrote the will, froze the transfers, filed a report, signed affidavits, took photographs of every corner of my home, not as memories, but as evidence. And in the silence of the study, I smiled to myself for the first time in years, not because I had won, but because I had remembered who I was before they began forgetting. I had been a mother, a wife, a nurse, a cook. It started with small things. The house's front lock jammed one morning. My husband cursed under his breath, fumbling with the key as if the door itself had turned against him. The heating broke 2 nights later, and he shivered beneath thick blankets, blaming the technician who hadn't even been called yet. And then came the letters. Red stamped envelopes slipped beneath the door like silent threats. Unpaid dues, a bounced check, an investigation into the asset transfer. I knew each one was coming before they arrived. I had filed most of them. Still, I said nothing. I simply sat in the small rented room I now called my sanctuary, a room that smelled of quiet and old jasmine, soap sipping tea, listening to the slow crumble of their illusion. My son called me, "Mom, there's been a mistake with the paperwork. The house isn't showing up in my name anymore. Did you change something?" I paused. "No," I said gently. "I corrected something." He stammered, voice trying to balance anger and fear. "We were going to fix it all together, remember?" I let silence be my reply. My daughter messaged next, long paragraphs, filled with phrases like misunderstanding, "You're not thinking straight, and we're still your children." Children don't gut their mother's life while she sleeps in the next room. I read her message twice, then deleted it. News travels fast in families, even faster when it involves property and shame. Cousins began asking questions. Neighbors whispered. My niece called and said softly, "I knew something was wrong, Auntie. You just vanished one day." No, I didn't vanish. I withdrew, like a tide pulling back before the wave returns. Their friends stopped coming around. No more Friday dinners. No more Instagram posts with laughing wine glasses and fireplace selfies. The house began to echo again, this time with absence. My husband, he was the last to break. I saw him at the bank once, eyes hollow, clothes wrinkled, trying to argue with a teller who no longer saw him as the confident man with plans, but as a desperate man with debts. He didn't see me in the corner, or maybe he did, and pretended he hadn't. It rained that day, not heavily, just enough to make everything feel exposed. The kind of rain that doesn't wash away sins, but makes them visible. Their nights became restless. My son called his sister at midnight. I know, because the call log came to me, accidentally still linked to an old account they'd forgotten I had access to. Their voices were sharp. Accusations flew like moths around a dying flame. "She's ruining everything. No, you promised me she'd be gone by now. She knows, doesn't she?" "Of course she knows." I smiled, not from joy, from closure, like watching termites destroy a chair you warned them not to sit on. Their foundation was cracking, not because I attacked, but because I had removed myself. And when the weight of what they'd stolen had no ground to rest on, the knock came in the late afternoon. Not the hurried kind of guilt, not the angry slam of confrontation. No, this was the knock of hesitation, of people standing on the other side of the door rehearsing their lines, hoping I'd still answer like the woman they used to manipulate. I didn't move right away. Let it ring out once, twice, then silence, and then again 3 soft taps, as if the weight in their chests had started to spread to their knuckles. I opened it slowly. There stood my son, older than I remembered him looking, hair thinner, eyes darting like a boy caught stealing from his own pocket. Beside him, my daughter, dressed nicely, too nicely, like someone playing the role of concerned child, for an audience that never arrived. "Mom," she said, and the word cracked like old porcelain. He cleared his throat. "Can we come in?" I stepped aside, not with warmth, not with welcome, but with silence the kind that tells you, speak carefully. You're standing in the presence of someone who knows. They sat like strangers, one on the edge of the sofa, the other on the dining chair, as if being closer would make the performance easier. We've been thinking, my son started, about everything, about how things happened. I nodded. Just once. No more than that. My daughter reached into her bag paper. A list, numbers, maybe, assets. I didn't look. We didn't mean for it to go this way, she said. Dad said you were tired, that you didn't want to manage everything anymore. We thought we were helping by forging, by selling, by standing by while I slept on hospital sheets alone. I looked at her hands, nails manicured, fingers trembling slightly. She folded the paper slowly, realizing it wasn't the time to place it in front of me like a peace offering. My son tried again. I've been losing sleep, Ma. I keep hearing your voice from that day you left. I didn't realize how much it haunted me until now. I smiled politely. You remember my voice? He swallowed. Yes, of course. Strange, I said gently. You didn't return a single call that week. They glanced at each other, like co-conspirators whose storylines were starting to diverge. We came to fix things, my daughter said, to see how you're doing, to make it right. No, I replied, voice calm. Even you came because you're losing things, because people are asking questions, because the walls are closing in, and you think I still hold the key. Her eyes welled up, but not the kind of tears that sting the soul. These were calculated, measured. Her voice broke, not out of grief, but from the effort of pretending she still had the right to cry here. My son put his hand on the table, palm up, open, like when he used to beg for sweets as a child. We were wrong, he whispered. Say something, please. So I did, but not what they hoped. I didn't forgive. I didn't comfort. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply let them speak. I told them to come back the next evening, not out of courtesy, but because I wanted daylight to witness what the dark had hidden too long. They arrived looking smaller than before. It wasn't their bodies, it was their presence, like people who knew they were walking into a courtroom, not a living room. I had laid everything on the dining table. 3 neat folders, one for my son, one for my daughter, one untouched for the father, who never had the courage to return. I gestured to the chairs. They sat. No one reached for tea. No one dared ask if I'd eaten. I opened the first folder. These are the original loan approvals, I said, sliding the papers toward my son. You told the bank I was too ill to handle finances, that I gave you power of attorney. He opened his mouth. Don't lie, I said gently. We're past that. He closed it again. I turned to my daughter, opened the second folder. These are the sale receipts for my jewelry, the ones Dad said were in storage. I traced the buyer. She remembered you clearly, said you haggled for a higher price. She looked down, her hands curled into fists in her lap. No mascara could hide the heat rising behind her eyes now. I continued. My voice never rose, never cracked. These are voice messages, I said, tapping the small black recorder beside me. Your conversations with Dad, about getting the house sold before it's too late, about how I'd fade eventually. I pressed play. Only 5 seconds. She doesn't even remember what day it is. Just nod and smile. We'll take care of the paperwork. My son flinched like the words had slapped him. My daughter reached for the recorder. I moved it away. No, I said. You don't get to touch the truth. They sat in silence. Not out of respect, out of exposure. I opened the last folder. My lawyer has copies of everything, I said. The will has been updated, the title deed restored, a restraining clause has been filed. You are both legally removed from access until further court evaluation. My son whispered, You're suing us. No, I replied. I'm protecting myself from people who mistake kindness for consent. The room was still. Outside, the wind knocked gently at the window pane. Even it seemed to listen now. I raised you both with my own hands, I said, held your heads when you had fevers, fed you when there wasn't enough for 3. I didn't ask for repayment, only decency. They said nothing, because what do thieves say when caught in the home? They looted. I looked at them, not with hatred, not with pain, with precision. You didn't just try to steal what I own. You tried to bury me while I was still breathing. My daughter let out a small sob. My son dropped his gaze. You thought I wouldn't know, I said. But mothers don't forget. We just wait. I stood. They stayed seated. And then, calmly, like offering tea after dinner, I said, let's discuss how you'll make things right. They didn't want anyone to know. Of course they didn't. Apologies, when whispered in private, cost less. But silence wasn't part of the agreement anymore. My terms were clear. You will write letters, I said, to the bank manager you lied to the neighbors you misled, and to the aunt who brought you food after my surgery while you were out shopping for curtains to hang in my room. My daughter blinked hard. But no, I said. You don't speak yet. They looked at each other, like the co-defendants, finally realizing their trial had no jury, only truth and consequence. I won't see you punished, I continued, not in the way you fear. There will be no screaming, no disowning. I will not tell people you are monsters, but I will tell them the truth. They shifted uncomfortably. My son bit the inside of his cheek. You will return every rupee taken in my name. If it's already spent, you will work for it. I don't care how long it takes, not because I need the money, but because stolen things rot in the hands that take them. They nodded. And your father? I paused, letting the silence remind them he hadn't shown up. He will receive a letter to Puff from me. It will contain no emotion, only records. And a copy will go to his employer. Let's see how many bonuses he earns while being audited. My daughter spoke then, softly. Are you ever going to forgive us? I looked at her, not cruelly, but not kindly either. Forgiveness, I said, isn't free. Her lips quivered. Mercy, I added, is earned, not assumed. They sat with that, let it settle like dust on old furniture, visible now only because the light had finally hit it. I opened the drawer behind me and placed a new envelope on the table. This is the legal binding, I said. My lawyer has drafted a declaration. You'll sign it. It confirms the assets are mine solely, that you relinquish all preemptive claims until I decide otherwise. If you violate it, you'll be prosecuted fully. Publicly. My son paled. Publicly. Yes, I said. I've been silent long enough. I watched their pride deflate, their eyes drop, their breaths slow down, not in calm, but in resignation. I'm not asking for guilt, I said, or love. I'm asking for correction. If you can't return what was lost in spirit, return what was stolen in action. My daughter whispered, we didn't mean to. I raised a hand. You meant to benefit from my absence. That's enough. They signed, not with resistance, but with that same robotic obedience I'd once seen when they were young and caught stealing cookies from the jar. Only this time, the jar was my entire life. As they left, I didn't walk them out, didn't offer water, didn't ask them to visit again. I just stood in the kitchen, where once I had packed their school lunches and folded the signed pages like clean linen. My hands didn't tremble. My heart didn't ache. Justice doesn't need rage to feel complete. Only balance, only truth.